In the first act of Hamlet, uh, the father says to the son, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night, the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." Now that's William Shakespeare's Hamlet, first act. Translation is, you have to be true to yourself. And if you are doing that, just as night follows the day, then you can't be anything but true to man. And you also have to be true to yourself in order to be true with anyone else. I'm Hannibal. Welcome to the Base-Ment. Freud, the father of psychology, as a lot would say, divided the human psyche into three major parts. There's the ID, the superego, and the ego. The id we would define as our primal base nature, our internal survivalist, if you will, that thing that we absolutely have to be, regardless of what layers we put on top of it, that still exist. The superego would be that judgment system that society has put upon us, that we live and work within and adopt as we have to. And then there's the ego, which is the link, the chain, the reconciliation, if you will, that tries to balance the two. It is the representation that we formulate or translate or transmit of ourselves, which balances the two. So you see, when Loretus, in Shakespeare's play, the father says to the son, "To thine own self be true, above all else." Now you have to ask yourself the question, which self am I going to be true to? Am I going to be true to the self that plays to society? Am I going to be true to the self that is just base and runs off survival instinct? Or am I going to be true to that representation of self of which I want society, or what I want to be seen, known as, that thing that I want to balance everything else upon? And thus begins the struggle, the internal struggle of self-representation. And you've heard me say it many times. Represent yourself. Above all things, represent yourself. Be true to yourself, because otherwise you can't be anything else. But even in saying that simple statement, I fail to transmit the fact that we still have to decide, judge, translate which version of ourself we are going to be true to. Now, that statement in itself sounds like, I'm giving you options to be something other than yourself. But not really. I'm saying pick a line, stick to it. We know what we have to deal with in society. Society is just that, people, systems. If you're living truly, then you adopt those things that work for you, work best within you, to help you present the best version of yourself. And then the other stuff becomes white noise. Thanks, James. Needed that reminder. White noise. That thing that just exists in the background. We hear it, but it doesn't bother us. It's like the TV station. Well, not anymore, but it used to be years ago. TV stations actually went off the air at a certain time. And when they went off the air, you had a screen that was just full of static, white noise. And it existed. It just. And we use this same thing now. There's actually audio recordings of this that people use to sleep by, because the ambient noise fades into the background and helps them to sleep. People used to fall asleep to the television when the station went off, and it actually helped them to sleep. It existed in the background, and they went on about being themselves. But again, the white noise exists in the background, and it does not make you or break you, because you still have to decide, are you going to cater to the id, the superego, which in my opinion is really not living to yourself. If you're going by society's judgmental systems and valuations, if they are different from yours. And then the ego, which is where we're trying to pull together the pieces to represent ourselves in a manner that satisfies society and ourselves. And people say, I just want to be me. I just want to be free. I don't like fake people. Then be you. If we can exist in a world where we can live our id-ism, or our, and let me take that and break that down for you. We say ideology, ideology, that philosophy which we have developed within ourselves, which satisfies our basic needs and allows us to grow and expand and perpetuate in a positive way. It would be idealistic. And unfortunately, we don't live in that world. We have to balance out the systems of which we live amongst and within. So it doesn't mean that we negate or distract from ourselves, although we quite often do. But what it does mean is that we have to realize what is true within us. And of that truth, which of it is, or what part of it is negative and what part of it is positive. Now, once we can reconcile that, then we can reconcile ourselves in terms of how do we press forward in being what we truly want to be, what we want to grow into. Everything's an evolution. You know, it's either an evolution or a revolution. Again, it's either evolution or a revolution. And in the end, evolution and revolution are of the same. Change, adaptation. Evolution is a natural cause that, or a natural occurrence that happens because of circumstances. Revolution is a forced occurrence that happens because of circumstances, or circumstances that happen because of a forced occurrence. I don't mean to get confusing, but bear with me. We can go back to the Civil War, slave trade, freedom of America, if you will, freedom of man, all of that, however you want to put it. Evolution, man changed because of the natural occurrences that happen within our atmospheres, the things that we dealt with, climate, the areas we lived in, the adaptations we needed to have in order to survive in certain physical circumstances. Revolution brought about a change in our circumstances. Revolution was a forced occurrence of man saying, I want things to be different, so I'm going to force the hands here. Now, it's still being forced, but there have been changes, if you will. So, I say all that to say, without losing the point, we have different aspects within us. All good is not all good, and all bad is not all bad. It's being able to recognize, manage, change those things of which we can in order to make them exist as we need them to, so that we can progress as we need to, is what makes the difference. So I'm going to go back to Shakespeare. This above all, to thine own self be true. Just make sure that the self of which you cater to is the self that you truly want to be seen as and can exist as. To thine own self. Thoughts from the basement.